No, public safety is paramount. I know it's paramount for you. It's paramount for the people that I spoke to today. I was down along Lenore. I was along 4th Avenue. I went down to the memorial. I talked to the business owners. I talked to people who knew her, people who just stopped by to say, pay their respects to the Kwan family. The thing that I'm hearing from everybody is, what are we doing? Because it's not enough.
And I think that's exactly, when this last Friday, I realized after some of the shootings that had gone, not only just on Tuesday with the family, but we also had 3 additional people that were shot and then 1 other that was fatally shot, and that I had to make sure that we created an action plan, which is the Community Violence Task Force. And right now we're pulling all of our extra resources, any little bit of resources in this department to address this gun violence. Not just gun violence, but those that are trafficking women, those that are selling narcotics, because we know that those that are selling narcotics are generating a lot of guns on the streets. And so we are going to focus on these 4 areas because it's unacceptable. It just is. Like I respond to the violence sometimes, unfortunately, too much. And that is the reason why we had to make an action plan right away.
Chief, how are you going to do anything, though, about the drug crisis? I mean, that Mary sector, right? Bell, Battery, Lenora, you guys are getting service calls out there all the time. And a lot of it is open air drug market, not just use, but a market that is happening. So how are you going to do something about drugs when City Council says no go on that ordinance? I mean, what's the policy? Do you have a policy? Are you reworking a policy as a result of that? Or are you going to say to City Council, let's get this done?
Well, that's part of that action plan that the mayor's office just announced this last week, a work group that's actually going to have it within a very, very short period of time to actually figure out, not only about getting people into services, but also the enforcement side. But we are still going to focus on those that are dealing the drugs that are into that community. We've got to reduce the demand of that community. And so we've actually just recently had even a patrol officer just going up to a vehicle where somebody was not awake in the vehicle and ended up recovering a lot of narcotics, almost 20 pounds worth of narcotics. And then we end up serving a warrant and end up recovering more narcotics in that house. So it is our efforts to make sure not only patrol officers, but our Community Violence Task Force, our narcotics unit, everybody is actually focused on these efforts to try and make sure that we weed out of the community of some of these narcotics. But we also have to reduce the demand. And that's where the services base comes in. That's where the investments in, whether it's mental health, because we know that people sometimes medicate themselves to deal with the mental health issues. And we've got to make sure that we've got a good comprehensive plan in place for that period, that piece.
What was your response to City Council's vote on that ordinance? And would you support a redo on that ordinance, and why?
Well, we're already working on a work plan, and that is, I'm already on that work plan group to try and make sure that we put something forward in front of City Council that will pass, that will actually give us the tools that we need to be able to do to be effective in law enforcement in the downtown core, but also throughout the city. And we also want to make sure that we're already focus our efforts on those that are actually dealing the drugs. And that is always going to continue, because that is really the crux of it. It's not so much the user, it's really the crux of the people dealing it in. If we can actually make a huge impact there, that's where our number one goal is.
But isn't it the user, if one of those users is in crisis, and then that crisis turns to violence?
Yeah, and right now, a lot of the people that we're arresting for dealing fentanyl and dealing with methamphetamines and others actually have a lot of guns on them as well, and that's where the violence does increase. We also do know that people that are sometimes, having mental health issues and using fentanyl, our propensity to commit assault or aggravated assault, and we want to monitor that as well. So that's the reason why we want to have some tools that allow us to be effective in that effort.
Okay, so does that mean that you, the mayor, are going to support a drug ordinance, a drug possession open?
That's what we're working. That's the work plan, and that is the work. I should say the work group is already moving forward. That was what was announced by the mayor's office. That is what I'm committed to doing. I'm committed to making sure that we put forward a legislation that the City Council can sign off. But I would support it to incorporate not only a treatment plan, but also having the ability to have some level of enforcement for us to have some tools that we might need, because we find that sometimes people that are using will sometimes end up, actually end up dealing with some of the narcotics as well, and we've got to be able to address that issue.
You said on Friday that Goosby is known to this department. We need to know how.
Yeah, so sometimes the people are known to our officers because they might be a victim of a crime, and they can also be, alerted to us by maybe suspicious circumstances.
But I want to ask you specifically about Goosby. How does this department know Goosby?
Yeah, and I think right now I'm going to be able to make sure that we are putting our best case forward in front of the prosecutors, and we want to make sure that we honor that case. And so there's not going to be much I'm going to be able to elaborate in this area because I want to make sure that we, for the sake of the family, that we actually put a good case forward on this and don't give people an opportunity to find an excuse of why they might have done this.
I think that people that I've talked to today, I mean, you'll hear it in the interviews tonight that we do, have said, we feel the chief needs to disclose this. We have a right to know. Don't we?
Well, if it ends up impacting the case and ends up giving somebody an alibi and the reason why they might not actually be accountable for that murder, no. I believe that we've got to make sure that we put our best case forward. We owe it to the family. We owe that justice to the family. We want to make sure that this community is safe. And, we also, we don't have any level of understanding if he had any diagnosis of mental health issues. We might come in contact with somebody because of a crisis issue, but we don't know if they've ever been diagnosed with that. And so that is the things that we're looking into, and that is what is going to also be part of this case. That is where a jury ends up being able to see all elements of this case to determine what happened. And we also need, as we learn some aspects of this case, it's going to be an ongoing part of this investigation, that we understand what happened so we can make sure that this doesn't ever happen again.
Okay, and I want to make sure that I heard you right. Did you say we don't know if mental health was an issue with Goosby?
What I said is that we do not know of any diagnosis of mental health issues. But we have come in contact with them because of crisis, but we do not know if there's been any level of diagnosis of mental health issues. Okay.
I want to ask you about the video. I just showed it to you. Here we are. Just off the cuff, I just showed you the video, your response.
It's horrific. And it's what I knew from the very beginning of this case. This is just never should have happened. I mean, when somebody literally pulls a gun and shoots randomly into a vehicle, like the community's scared, the community is nervous. I actually just met with community members in the Korean community. I've been meeting with all sorts of different people throughout this last week, and I've heard their fears, I've heard their concerns, and I've heard, and I'm wanting to make sure that we are doing everything we can to, number one, we did make an arrest in this case, but that will never bring justice back to this family. And when we start to look at some of the stuff that we're actually doing on the Community Violence Task Force, we are going to go after people that are harming our community, that are people that are trafficking our women, that are people that are, selling, fentanyl and selling other harmful drugs, but also committing crimes with guns. And that is really what we're focused on in the summer. We cannot have that moving forward.
I've heard seasoned first responders say that this is the most tragic thing they've seen this year.
I think in my career, this case will be something that you'll remember all the time. You don't forget cases like this because just the level of randomness to it. You come in contact with a lot of cases every single year. We run about 550,000 cases a year. But to have a case like this, to have the horrificness of this, you'll always remember it.
Are we at a tipping point?
I think, honestly, just hearing from the community, I was actually at a vigil on Saturday, and I believe that we are at a tipping point. I believe people are wanting to make sure that they feel safe. And I want them to feel safe. And I feel like we were doing really good on turning a corner and people are always coming up to me and saying, gosh, I feel safer. But having a case like this, it takes us 10 steps back. And we've got to build that trust with the community to make sure that we are doing everything we can to make this safe. This last weekend, even redeploying our officers this last weekend, it was a lot quieter. It was a lot safer this weekend. But as we get into these summer months and then we get into summer weeks, we've got to make sure that we put that visible presence to make people feel safe again.
The emphasis patrol, you just mentioned that again. What was interesting to people in Belltown is you didn't mention Belltown.
Downtown core incorporates anything from the CID all the way up into Denny.
Okay, so Belltown's part of this.
Yeah, Belltown is part of this. So, we are looking at the full downtown core, all the way to include Little Saigon and a Chinatown International District. And then the south end, which is, that it seems like big areas, but when you start to look at the areas of violence that's occurred from, the 9400 block of Rainier, Atlantic Street boat ramp, we have very specific areas that we're really going to be focusing our efforts on, because that is where the violence has been a reoccurrence. And we know in the downtown core, we have Little Saigon, 12th and Jackson, 5th and Jackson. In the downtown core, 3rd and Pine, 3rd and Pike, 3rd and Bell. All these areas are all incorporated into that. In Aurora, we can, identify certain blocks that we want to spend our emphasis time in. And so that is all we wanted to make sure that we're data-driven, but we're putting in our officers in the right area.
And I think you said this, let's talk about this, that the data is one thing, but feeling safe is another. And people don't feel safe in this city.
Yeah, and I've heard that before, and I want to make sure that we earn people's trust back to making this feel safe. That is the reason why I announced I'm pulling every level of resource, because we're still short-staffed. We're still lost without 360 officers. Yeah. And so for me, it was like, this is our need to making sure that I don't wait on this, that we are actually being proactive in addressing this gun violence as we enter the summer months. Because we know that during the summer months, things always uptick. But we also want to make sure that people are utilizing our parks, they're utilizing our downtown, and if they don't feel safe, they're not going to use those spaces. Yeah. And so that is the reason why I created this task force. But we are running 7 days a week. We are making sure we have the right detectives, that we have the right specialty units, and that hopefully will help keep people safe. That doesn't mean that we're not going to have a shooting, but by actually putting them in the right place and targeting those that are actually harming the community, identifying those that are preying, the actual specific people that are actually carrying guns, and that is our work. That is what our work is, with our working with our gun violence reduction unit to identify people that are actually having guns.
I know that you really talk about going after the drug dealers. But I think when people walk the streets, like let's just go back down to that Belltown neighborhood, like maybe you can go anywhere from Western to 5th and people are selling drugs.
Yeah.
You know it, I know it. People that want the drugs know it.
Yeah.
What can you say to, what I've heard from businesses in particular today is, I see people tweaked out all over the city. I see people in distress. I see people ODing. It's like, it's not now, it's kind of become the norm. And when they continue to see that, because maybe we're going after the people that are just selling the drugs because our hands are tied for the others, it doesn't look like it's getting better.
Well, and I actually think that right now, that is, after a tragedy, we are going to have a lot of level of emotion. Leading up to the tragedy, people had said that they feel a little safer walking down the streets. But having a case like this, I can completely understand why people have that fear, because they are seeing this on an everyday basis. They're seeing people using drugs in their area. They're seeing people that are having mental health issues in crisis. And some of that activity is not criminal in nature, but people immediately want something to be doing something about it. That's where those investments are so crucial. That's a part of the downtown activation plan that the mayor is also announcing, to try and make sure that we activate those spaces, that we get utilize all of our park spaces, that we're cleaning up the streets. DSA is also trying to make sure that they're playing a visible presence where they're cleaning up the sidewalks, and all of that is getting everybody together. And I think with the task force and with all those investments, that is what's going to hopefully help us have a safe summer. And it's not just safe summer in the downtown area. I need it up on Aurora. I need it in the Central District. I need it in the South End. And right now, I've got officers that are spending time after school and before school at Garfield High School, because we've had a couple shootings there. And as they get into the summer months, I still want to make sure there's a lot of activities that we're having that visible presence in the community. And so what I find myself is you don't want to spread yourself out so thin that you can't be effective, but that's the reason why we really are focusing on 4 specific areas. But we're still going to have patrol officers throughout the city. We're still going to make sure that we have emphasis throughout the city, but really hitting these 4 areas very specific to the certain type of activity that we're focused on.
Chief, we want to do our best to hold you accountable. How are you going to hold yourself accountable?
I'm responding to every shooting. I'm not every shooting, but every homicide. I'm actually making sure that we're doing everything we can. We're putting all the resources in place. you know, and just getting all of our teams to actually make sure that they're all focused on the same mission. And so I find myself every single day trying to hold myself accountable to it. But I've actually been in community meetings every single day, just even from Tuesday, trying to make sure I understand the community's concerns, and then I'm putting everything in place to make sure that I'm meeting those and addressing those issues.
I know you're. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I know that you're busy. I want to know, can you boil down for me what you think happened? Why are things as bad as they are? Because the thing I hear over and over again is, this isn't the Seattle I remember. It's not the Seattle you remember. It's not the Seattle I remember when I moved here.
Yeah.
What happened?
You know, I tell people we need more officers. Yeah. I'm going to tell you that right now. Like, there's no way around it. We have to have that visible presence. We have to make sure that there's some accountability for, you know, people when people commit crime, and we've got to make sure that we restore that level of accountability. And we're working currently with the city attorney, we're working with the King County Prosecutor's Office, and now we're working with the Federal Prosecutor's Office on making sure that all that accountability is done. But there's more work to be done because, you know, COVID really completely changed this department. The George Floyd riots and protests changed this department. We have to get back to making sure that we're focused on law enforcement. We're focused on working with community. We're focused on addressing the issues that are our biggest of concern. And I know it's going to be a very tough time, but I think our department is already working on addressing those you know, specific areas, and we have a lot more work to be done, and that's what we're going to focus on this summer.
Last question for you. Do you as the police chief, do you support the city attorney prosecuting gross misdemeanors for open-air use and drug possession? Yeah,
I mean, this is one tool. That doesn't mean that we're going to use it for every single case, because if I had to make 10 arrests, if our officers had to make 10 arrests, then I literally take 10 officers off the streets to be able to do it. So I really want to make sure that we're getting people into services and addressing the root cause of the issue. But I also need to have a tool sometimes to be able to get people into those services. Yeah. And I think that's where that work group is really going to be crucial to making sure that those services are set up.
Does that mean that you're going to let city council members know how you feel? That you're going to be at those meetings? That
I'm
you're
going to be in those
also...
meetings. Okay. Yes, I am going to be in those meetings. I'm actually part of the work group, and we are working with the mayor's office.
And what about the council meeting? If this comes up for another vote, are you going to be there to address council and tell them you want this, you need this?
I will convey every aspect of this to make sure that they understand how important this is to the city.